Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. This is Boris Tizengozen with you, July 21st. Here are the main news stories at this moment. Peskov has denied reports that Wildberries warehouses are being used to supply goods to the Russian Federation's army. Oh well, if Peskov denied it, then that's it, everyone can go home. Stand down, Magyar. In general, the mustachioed kraken is released in Russia in two cases. The first is when you need to say something without actually saying anything, and the second is to outright lie. Alright then, what are FPV drones and fiber optic spools being used for? Armor plates, thermal imagers that are sold there, who are they for and what are they used for? You know, it's the old "we're not there," part 52, optics. What is all this for? Reconnaissance drones. I've always wondered, when Peskov lies, does he at least feel a little bit ashamed? No. And after a while, that lie gets exposed anyway. So why do you lie so blatantly? But that's how everything is set up for them. For them, the main thing is this deity, the Botox jellyfish Tsar. He just revels in and enjoys lying. Have you noticed, when Putin lies, he bulges his eyes in this weird way and almost seems to glow from within? For you or for me, if someone asked us to lie, it would probably be obvious. We might feel guilty. A conscientious person would stumble if asked to lie outright. Maybe even blush, I don't know. But these people don't even hesitate, they enjoy it. Remember when Putin was saying that in Crimea there were just some little green men, and that in Donbass people were just buying everything at army surplus stores? His eyes were practically glowing. Like, look at me, I can lie to you and you can't do anything about it. That's why, for Putin, it's so upsetting when someone deceives him. You probably noticed that too. We were deceived. That's what really stings for him. It's a real insult. For him, all of diplomacy is measured by who managed to fool whom. He tricked someone tricked him. When it's him, he doesn't like it. By the way, here's another statement from the mustachioed floozy. Russia is conducting the special military operation so that no NATO troops will be present on Ukrainian territory, Peskov said. Are you just an idiot or what? And why isn't Russia conducting a special military operation against countries where those troops are already present on their borders? In fact, there are even specific countries where NATO itself is present. So actually, based on this statement, it turns out that Russia isn't fighting NATO after all, but Ukraine, just to make sure no NATO troops are present here. Or are they actually here and fighting against Russia? Peskov, make up your mind already. Well, if NATO troops are present here, then why isn't Russia striking NATO headquarters? Over there, after all those rusty pipes are aimed at Washington. Putin, what's up with you? You know where the headquarters is, you know where the command centers are. What? Go on, give it a try. Even that guy, what's his name, Kalaich, lately his logic has started to fail. Although this Laich, he's a bit livelier. That other one, the replicant, just reads everything off a piece of paper all the time, but this one is livelier. Just recently, this Laich was shouting, we were forced, we were forced. He was trying to convince everyone, grabbing people. We were forced to. You remember when he was grabbing those SVO guys saying we were forced, it was them, they started it. It's still unclear how he was trying to defend Donbass while standing on tanks near Kiev. How does that work? And now you see the rhetoric has changed. Russia will endure, Russia has endured worse. Actually, no, it won't endure. And the USSR, which Putin is always dreaming about, always reflecting on the Soviet Union, was much more powerful and unified, much more, and yet it still collapsed. So Russia won't endure, it won't. And by the way, Putin will go down in history as the one who destroyed Russia in its current form, brought it to the edge of the abyss, gave it a kick, and then someone else from behind finished the job, sending it tumbling down. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It's important for the channel's promotion. You can do it right now without putting it off. So go ahead and subscribe. We are fighting against Putin's propaganda, and the more of us there are, the fewer of those scumbags who love to kiss the Botoxed backside. So subscribe. And I also remember very well, friends, how that balding scum sat there and with a proud look declared, I have made the decision to begin the special military operation. And now he's fighting to make sure there are no NATO troops here. By the way, in that same statement, when Putin invaded Ukraine, he said that the goal was to protect the people of Donbass, demilitarization, and denazification. Those have long since left the chat, both demilitarization and denazification. At the same time, Putin claimed back then that Russia had no plans to occupy Ukrainian territories. In that speech where he said, "I am announcing a special military operation," there was no mention whatsoever of NATO troops. He didn't say a single word about NATO. But now the rhetoric has changed, and now they're wondering how to keep Ukraine from burning everything in Russia to the ground. So how do you do that, huh? By the way, Russian Telegram channels are now actively spreading rumors that Ukraine is about to start destroying Wildberries and ozone warehouses in droves, and not just those. People who can are already starting to take their goods from these warehouses. I'd like to remind you that just in the past few months, dozens of warehouses in Ukraine have been destroyed. Warehouses with food, goods, even specifically marked Red Cross warehouses. So retribution is inevitable. It's already too late to drink Borjomi and take your goods back. Many won't make it in time. And let me remind you, Ukraine is performing a true feat right now, and Ukrainians will go down in history in an incredible way. In every episode, we have an important fundraiser for the defense forces of Ukraine. We are continuing to raise funds for a pickup truck for the soldiers of the tank battalion of the 31st Separate Mechanized Brigade. Unfortunately, their vehicle was recently destroyed, and now they need our help, yours and mine. Let's help them. The fundraiser is small. I think if we all come together, we'll be able to close it quickly. The soldiers have recorded a video message for you. Please take a look.
Бажаю здоров'я. Ми бійці відділення Церберу з 31-ї МБР разом з Борисом Тізенхаузеном та 24-м каналом відкрили збір на автомобіль, який допоможе в виконанні наших бойових задач. Долучайтесь, разом ми сила. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. There are mono, private, and PayPal options for those who want to help from abroad. There's a QR code in the corner. If you're watching on other channels, it also leads to the fundraiser. And a huge thank you to everyone who supports the fundraisers and supports our defense forces. Thank you from me and from our soldiers whom you've already helped. You are simply awesome. That's it. That's just wow, really. By the way, one of Putin's buddies recently set an example for him on how to behave in the Russian Federation from now on. The dictator who has ruled Nicaragua for more than 30 years and is a close friend of Putin has announced the cancellation of elections in the country altogether. Daniel Ortega, a revolutionary who has lost his mind, who seized power long ago and, by the way, exploits the narrative that the US is to blame for everything, has announced his intention to completely abolish elections. This dictator is 80 years old, and yet he's still at it. I watched a video of him. He can barely walk anymore, yet he's still set on abolishing elections. He is considered a close friend and ally of Putin. And he said that it is unacceptable for any forces affiliated with the United States to seize power. You see, it's a universal scheme. Let me remind you that according to the UN, Nicaragua is one of the poorest countries in Latin America. And for 30 years now, Ortega has been telling everyone how he's going to lift the people out of the slums. In reality, he's only dragging them further in. Nicaragua consistently votes in the UN against resolutions condemning Moscow, for which Putin periodically forgives some of its debts and even throws in some money. Of course, all at the expense of Russians. After all, it's not Putin's own money that he's writing off for Nicaragua. Let me quote Ortega. There will be no more elections here through which they could try to seize the government and take power into their own hands. The times when US-backed parties could return to power are over. That will never happen again. See how simple it is, he just cancelled all the elections. He also stated that, together with the parliament, laws will soon be developed that will make it easy to remove opposition representatives from elections and prevent them from participating. So what are you waiting for? Why not just go ahead and shoot them right away then? By the way, Putin has already outpaced Ortega in this regard a long time ago. Let me just remind you that in 2009, the Supreme Court of Nicaragua overturned the constitutional provision that prohibited running for a second term. You'll see now this is basically a carbon copy of all dictators, and in January 2014, the parliament amended the constitution, removing the limit on the number of presidential terms. See, all dictators are the same. Interesting fact, Russia supplies Lada Kalina cars to Nicaragua. Why? No one knows, but there they use them as taxis. And let me also remind you, Nicaragua was the first, yes, the very first country to recognize the independence of the unrecognized Abkhazia and South Ossetia. It's clear that there's a cast iron dependence on Russia. By the way, there's some very interesting statistics about this. To date, only 5 countries have recognized the independence of the unrecognized Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Well, if we're talking about UN member states. Russia, of course, which started this whole mess. Nicaragua in the same year, 2008, after the Russo-Georgian War. Venezuela in 2009, but now, with everyone except Maduro gone, that's all that's left. So, of those who recognize them, Putin has already lost half. Who else recognized them? Nauru in 2009. In this case, it was just a straightforward bribe. Nauru is simply a small island nation, about 20 square kilometers in size. Almost on the same day, Nauru recognizes the independence of these illegal entities, and literally that very day, the authorities of Nauru receive $50 million for some projects from Russia or something like that. It was just a blatant bribe. And who else? Also Syria in 2018, but there, minus Assad as well. So half of the dictators who recognized them at Putin's behest are no longer dictators. Well, so now it's just Putin and Ortega still hobbling along together. Listen, I was just thinking, if tomorrow some totally unhinged, completely out of her mind Tereshkova says, Putin should be president forever, let's cancel the elections, let's change the constitution entirely, or better yet, let's just abolish the constitution. The thing is, no one in Russia would be able to stop this. Now Putin, just like late Brezhnev, reads from a piece of paper and constantly spouts some nonsense. He goes on about how Russia is racing forward. I mean, he's completely detached from reality, but no one in Russia can stop him. Not only can they not stop him, they're even afraid to say out loud, look, this is just idiotic. He's already lost his mind. This crazy old man. You know, for Russians, it turns out they should be relying on Ukraine, since it's Ukraine that will eventually bring Russia to collapse, nail shut Putin's coffin, and give them a chance to get rid of Putin. But again, it will be done by Ukraine's hands. So for Russians, as strange as it may sound, they really do need to hope for Ukraine. But then, you know, once they get rid of Putin, Kabeva with her kids, or however you say it, her little Kabevas, will slip away to China, and a lot of very unpleasant surprises will be revealed for Russians. For example, that Russians no longer have any savings in the banks, that the state has long since gotten its hands on them and scooped them out, all while Putin was appearing on TV screens saying that everything was fine. And here's some news, as they say, right on topic. The Russian central bank has sold a record 44 tons of gold from its reserves to fill Putin's military budget. Russia has begun to burn through its gold reserves at a record pace. Just in the first half of this year, 44 tons of gold were sold. This is the largest reduction in gold reserves in at least 25 years of observation. In June alone, the reserves decreased by another 9.3 tons. So they're basically selling it off by the pallet right off the bat. For comparison, during the pandemic, Russia reduced its gold reserves by about 7.5 tons over 10 months. Over 10 months during the pandemic. Now in just half a year it's 44 tons, which is almost 6 times more. Putin has boldly cracked open the gold stash. And by the way, the war is now consuming not only the current oil and gas expenditures, which are burning up in every sense, but also the strategic reserves that Russia has been accumulating for decades. Here's another piece of news I couldn't ignore. The Federal Protective Service has banned people from appearing near the Moscow Kremlin with pets. This new measure has been introduced to ensure the safety of the country's top officials. I honestly don't even know. He's just that scared already. What did cats and dogs ever do to you, you 1.5 meter tall ghoul? Seriously, what? I think you remember the story when Putin, knowing that Angela Merkel was very afraid of dogs, she'd been bitten once and has a real panic about them. So Angela Merkel arrived for a meeting with Putin, and Putin deliberately let out his Labrador, Connie, who scared Merkel. In fact, Putin even apologized for this incident later, admitting that the German side had specifically asked him not to bring out the dog, but he let her out anyway to frighten Merkel. So why am I bringing this up? Absolutely everyone who has beloved pets, whether they are cats or dogs, probably understands perfectly well that the idea of using your own dear animals to intentionally scare someone or to cause another person harm is just completely and utterly absurd. Putin has never loved anyone except himself, of course. I think he completely lacks the ability to empathize. In other words, zero empathy. He didn't love his wife either. In her memoirs, she wrote about how he tormented her, making her stand outside in the freezing cold until she was shaking, just waiting. He himself would stand around the corner for an hour and a half. He didn't love his children either, his daughters, whom he referred to as those women. So he never loved anyone except himself. And I think in 2013 they organized a photo shoot with dogs for Putin. This is to help understand the rot we're dealing with. They arranged a photo shoot with dogs for him in 2013. Putin, who had gotten quite overweight by then, was rolling around in the snow with a Bulgarian Shepherd and a Japanese Akita. He was given these dogs as gifts, and after this photo shoot, someone asked, "So where is the Labrador Connie? Where is the dog that Putin supposedly loves, the one that's always with him?" And you know what? At that time, Peskov answered, Peskov, because he was always constantly by Putin's side, he said then that, well, Connie is already old, apparently not suitable for photo shoots anymore. Do you understand? Yes, for those who have dogs, cats, whether it's 5 years or 15, that's real love. Old or young, it doesn't matter. It's just, well, that's how it is. But this scumbag, for him, everything was always about image, about appearances. Even dogs, people, children. It was all for show, and inside there was absolutely zero empathy. An insecure, pathetic, cowardly clerk. And so here, there's an understanding of why Putin will need mobilization in the near future. But now there's an understanding already based on statistics. In other words, without this, the Russian Federation won't make it, but even with it, Russia still might not make it. Russia has failed its recruitment plan for the drone forces. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation was unable to recruit the planned number of personnel for the drone systems forces. And speaking at the board meeting, Deputy Minister Alexei Krivoruchko stated that in the first 6 months, 8,000 specialists were trained. But according to the recruitment schedule they had, by this point, they should have almost 35,000. According to this schedule, that's almost 4 times more. The failure is due both to the overall slowdown in recruitment rates for the Russian army, especially in the first quarter of this year, and to the unsuccessful campaign to recruit students. It didn't work out. They even tried to expel students and set quotas for how many needed to be expelled. Students don't want to go and die ingloriously, despite the propaganda, pressure, or whatever money they're being offered. In other words, they refuse to sign contracts. It's clear that they could easily be transferred to assault units. That's exactly why they're trying to enroll them there. Overall, Putin needs a new mobilization, but even with a new mobilization, he might not be able to manage. And if it really does start, then he'll either have to shut down the entire internet completely so that no one hears or sees anything at all. But that's problematic too. By the way, due to a diesel shortage, Russian farmers have been advised to switch to furnace fuel. This is not a joke. This is stated in a letter from the director of the Department of Crop Production, Andrei Artikulov. Well, furnace fuel is a relatively cheap petroleum product, similar in fractional composition to diesel, but intended for boilers, furnaces, and heating systems. In general, old Soviet tractors might have worked fine on this kind of fuel, but definitely not modern equipment. Just think about it. A country that used to export oil by the millions of barrels is now discussing what to fuel tractors with and what kind of junk to pour in instead of diesel, just to somehow harvest at least part of the crop. In short, that's what their management has led to. Azerbaijan's President Aliyev stated that Russia is no longer able to fully supply its traditional partners with oil and gas. Well, obviously because of the strikes on the refineries. At the same time, Aliyev said that Azerbaijan is ready to supply oil to Europe if European banks resume investments in oil and gas infrastructure. Good for you, Aliyev. Who else hasn't taken a shot at this half-dead, disgraced underground conqueror? You know, as they say, in a big family, you don't snap your dentures. Now they're going to squeeze the fuel markets away from the Russian Federation too. Or rather, how can you even call it squeezing if Russia physically can't sell anything on those markets anymore? India, Kazakhstan, Belarus, please, at least give us a little diesel and gasoline, just enough for the sowing season. Look what he's managed to do. And you, friends, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Subscribe to the channel, don't forget. And let's help our soldiers from the 31st Separate Mechanized Brigade. The link to support our defenders is in the description of this video. Have a peaceful day, everyone, and glory to Ukraine.